Give me back my damn wallet, kid. Thomas Romano's voice thundered through the narrow alley as his $3,000 Italian leather shoes pounded against wet pavement. The 17-year-old boy ahead of him stumbled, clutching something against his chest, but kept running. Thomas had been stepping out of Salvatore's, his own upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago, when nimble fingers had snatched his wallet from his jacket pocket. Most people would call the police. Thomas Romano, head of the most powerful crime family in the Midwest, had other methods. The boy darted left into a maze of abandoned buildings. Thomas followed, his perfectly tailored suit somehow still immaculate despite the chase. Years of hunting down debtors and traitors had kept the 42-year-old in excellent shape. "You picked the wrong mark, kid," Thomas shouted, his voice echoing off crumbling brick walls. But something made him pause. This wasn't some street-smart punk looking for drug money. The kid's clothes were clean but worn, his sneakers had holes, and he ran like someone desperate, not cocky. Thomas had seen enough desperation to recognize it. The boy disappeared into a dilapidated house, its windows boarded up, paint peeling like old scabs. Thomas approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun beneath his jacket. Before we continue this incredible story of unexpected love and danger, I need you to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This tale of how one stolen wallet changed 2 lives forever is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Give this video a thumbs up if you're ready for a love story unlike any other. Thomas pushed open the sagging front door. The stench hit him immediately: mold, decay, and something else: sickness. His eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. "Please, mister, I'm sorry." The boy's voice came from the back room, high with panic. "I'll give it back, I swear. I just needed... My mum, she's..." Thomas moved toward the voice, his expensive shoes creaking on rotted floorboards. What he saw in that back room stopped him cold. A woman lay on a mattress on the floor, so pale she looked translucent. Her breathing was shallow, labored. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but even in her weakened state, Thomas could see she had once been beautiful. Still was beneath the illness ravaging her body. "Jake, what's happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The boy, Jake, knelt beside her, Thomas's leather wallet clutched in his trembling hands. "It's okay, Mom. I got the money for your medicine. This man was just..." "I was just getting my property back," Thomas said quietly, stepping into the room. Mariana's eyes, a striking green even in her sickness, met his. There was no fear there, only a mother's fierce protectiveness and crushing shame. "I'm sorry about my son," she said, struggling to sit up. "We'll find a way to pay you back whatever he took." Thomas looked at the wallet in Jake's hands, then at the medicine bottles on a cardboard box, serving as a nightstand. All empty. He understood now. 3 days had passed since Thomas Romano discovered the Wilson family in that decaying house. 3 days since Mariana's proud green eyes had haunted his thoughts during board meetings with his lieutenants. "Sure you've been distracted, boss?" Vincent DeMarco, his right-hand man, observed as they sat in Thomas's private office above the restaurant. "The Castellano situation needs your attention." Thomas stared out the window toward the south side, where he'd left a family in desperate need. He'd given Jake $500 that day, enough for Mariana's medication and some food. But it was a temporary fix. "Handle Castellano yourself, Vincent. I have other priorities." Vincent's eyebrows shot up. In 15 years of working for Thomas, he'd never heard him delegate something so important. Thomas had built his empire through ruthless calculation, never allowing emotions to cloud his judgment. Yet here he was, unable to concentrate on anything but a sick woman he'd known for exactly 17 minutes. His phone buzzed. Dr. Sarah Chen, his personal physician, was calling back. "Thomas, I reviewed those test results you sent." Dr. Chen's voice was carefully professional. "The patient needs immediate intervention. We're talking advanced stage illness here. Without proper treatment..." "What kind of treatment?" Thomas interrupted. "Experimental therapy at Northwestern Memorial. It's expensive. We're talking 6 figures. Even then, there's no guarantee." Thomas ended the call and stared at his hands. Hands that had built an empire worth hundreds of millions. Hands that had signed death warrants for men who crossed him. Now those same hands trembled slightly as he thought about a woman whose name he barely knew. "Vincent, clear my schedule for the rest of the week." "Boss, you can't be serious. The Chicago families are meeting..." "I said clear it." Thomas's voice carried the steel that had made him legendary in the underworld. 2 hours later, Thomas stood outside the ramshackle house, holding a briefcase containing $50,000 cash and a business card for the best oncologist in Chicago. Jake opened the door, his eyes widening in recognition and fear. "Please don't hurt my mom," he whispered. "I already gave back your wallet. Where is she?" "Kid?" Jake led him to the back room where Mariana lay exactly as he'd left her, but now she was awake, watching him with those remarkable eyes. "You came back," she said simply. "I brought help." Thomas set the briefcase down and pulled out the business card. "Dr. Elizabeth Morrison at Northwestern Memorial. She's expecting your call." Mariana stared at the card, then at him. "I can't afford—" "It's taken care of." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Thomas found himself studying her face, the delicate bone structure beneath the illness, the way her hair caught what little light filtered through the boards. He'd known some of the most beautiful women in Chicago, socialites, models, actresses. None had ever made him feel like this room was the only place in the world that mattered, because everyone deserves a fighting chance, he said finally. Northwestern Memorial Hospital bustled with activity as Thomas paced the private waiting room he'd arranged. It had been 6 hours since Mariana was admitted for her first round of experimental treatment. Dr. Morrison emerged from the treatment area, removing her gloves. "Mr. Romano, the patient is responding well to the initial therapy. She's stronger than her condition suggests." Thomas felt tension he didn't know he'd been carrying leave his shoulders. "When can I see her?" "She's asking for you, actually. Room 2847. Thomas found Mariana propped up in bed, looking more alert than he'd seen her. Color had returned to her cheeks, though she was still far too thin. Jake sat beside her, no longer the terrified boy who'd stolen a wallet, but a teenager relieved beyond measure. "You saved my mom's life," Jake said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you. Just stay out of trouble, kid." Thomas's attention was entirely on Mariana, who watched him with curious intensity. "The nurses told me you arranged a private room. The best doctors, everything," she said. "This must be costing you a fortune." Thomas shrugged. "I've got fortunes to spare." "That's not an answer." Despite her weakness, Mariana's voice carried a strength that commanded respect. "I need to understand why a complete stranger is doing this for us." Thomas had asked himself the same question repeatedly. He'd been raised to see kindness as weakness, emotions as liabilities. Yet something about this woman's dignity in the face of devastating circumstances called to a part of himself he'd buried long ago. "Maybe I'm tired of only using my money to hurt people," he said, surprising himself with the honesty. Mariana studied his face. "What do you do?" "Mr. Romano?" The question he'd been dreading. Thomas Romano's name was whispered in certain circles throughout Chicago. His legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, waste management, provided cover for operations that would horrify this gentlewoman. "I'm in business," he said carefully. "What kind of business requires you to carry so much cash?" Smart. Too smart. Thomas found himself respecting her intelligence, even as it complicated things. "The kind that values discretion," he replied. Jake looked between them, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "Mum, does it matter? He helped us when no one else would." Mariana's eyes never left Thomas's face. "It matters because kindness without truth isn't really kindness at all." The comment hit Thomas like a physical blow. In his world, truth was a luxury he rarely afforded anyone, yet this woman seemed to see through every carefully constructed wall he'd built. "Maybe we could talk about this when you're feeling stronger," Thomas suggested. "I'm feeling stronger now, strong enough to know when someone's deflecting my questions." Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed with an emergency message from Vincent. 3 rival family members had been found dead in Grant Park. Bodies were dropping, which meant war was coming. "I have to go," Thomas said abruptly. "Will you come back?" Mariana asked. The simple question carried weight that had nothing to do with her medical treatment and everything to do with something growing between them that neither had named yet. "Yes," Thomas said without hesitation. "I'll come back." 2 weeks later, Mariana was home, not in the decaying house where Thomas first found her, but in the furnished apartment he'd quietly arranged on the north side. She stood by the window overlooking Lincoln Park, watching Jake play basketball with other teenagers for the first time in months. The experimental treatment was working. Dr. Morrison had confirmed that Mariana's condition was stabilizing, though she'd need ongoing therapy for the foreseeable future. Color had returned to her face, and she'd gained 15 pounds. "You're going to spoil us beyond repair," Mariana said, as Thomas entered with groceries. He'd taken to visiting daily, initially under the pretense of checking on her progress. But they both knew his presence had evolved into something more personal. "Jake needs to eat if he's going to make the school basketball team," Thomas replied, unpacking steaks and fresh vegetables. "Since when do crime lords grocery shop?" Mariana asked casually. Thomas froze. "What makes you think—" "Thomas, I'm not stupid, and I'm not naive." Mariana turned from the window to face him. "I looked you up online. Thomas Romano, alleged head of the Romano crime family. 7 FBI investigations, no convictions. Owner of 12 legitimate businesses across Chicago." The careful distance Thomas had been maintaining crumbled. "And what exactly do you plan to do with that information?" "Nothing, absolutely nothing." Mariana stepped closer. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? A criminal? A man who saved my son from a life of stealing to survive. A man who's given me a chance to watch my child grow up. A man who sits by my hospital bed reading mystery novels aloud because he thinks it helps me relax." Thomas had spent 30 years perfecting an image of cold ruthlessness. Yet this woman saw through every layer of protection to something he'd forgotten existed. "You don't understand what my life involves, Mariana. The things I've done. Have you ever killed an innocent person?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. "No." "Do you hurt children, women, people who can't defend themselves?" "Never." "Then you're not the monster you think you are." Mariana reached out tentatively and touched his hand. "You're just a man who chose a dangerous path, but kept his soul intact." Thomas stared down at their joined hands. Hers was soft, warm, still too thin, but gaining strength daily. His was scarred from fights, marked by choices that had shaped him into someone he'd never intended to become. "My world isn't safe for people like you and Jake," he said quietly. "Your world needs people like us," Mariana replied. "Maybe that's why fate put Jake in front of your restaurant that night." Before Thomas could respond, Jake burst through the door, basketball still in his hands, face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Coach Miller says if I keep improving I might make varsity next year." And Thomas— Jake paused, noticing their proximity and joined hands. "Oh, sorry, did I interrupt something?" Mariana and Thomas separated quickly, but the teenager's knowing smile suggested he'd seen exactly what he'd hoped to see. "Nothing to interrupt," Thomas said gruffly, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "Right," Jake grinned. "Hey, Thomas, want to shoot some hoops? I bet a tough guy like you can't keep up with me." Thomas found himself laughing, actually laughing for the first time in years. "Kid, I was playing basketball before you were born." As they headed toward the park, Mariana called after them, "Be careful, and Thomas, dinner's at 7. Thomas turned back to see her smiling in the doorway, and something in his chest tightened. For the first time in his adult life, he had something to lose that mattered more than power or money. Dax, the meeting at Romano's restaurant was not going well. Thomas sat at the head of the table in his private dining room, watching his lieutenants argue among themselves while he thought about Mariana's laugh when he'd told her about Jake's basketball game. "Boss, are you listening?" Vincent's sharp tone cut through his distraction. Thomas refocused on the 8 men around the table, his inner circle, each responsible for different aspects of his organization. Their faces showed concern, frustration, and barely concealed suspicion. "The Castellano family is moving on our territory," continued Mickey Torino, Thomas's enforcer. 3 of our businesses have been hit in the past week. They're testing us, seeing if we've gone soft." "Why would they think we've gone soft?" Thomas asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because our boss has been playing house with some woman instead of handling business," snapped Joey Marconi, the youngest of his lieutenants and the most ambitious. "Word on the street is Thomas Romano's lost his edge." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Thomas's reputation had been built on swift, decisive responses to disrespect. The old Thomas would have put Joey through the nearest window for speaking so boldly. Instead, he simply stared at the younger man until Joey shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "My personal life doesn't affect my ability to run this organization," Thomas said quietly. "Doesn't it?" Vincent leaned forward. "Thomas, I've known you for 15 years. You've changed, you're distracted, making decisions based on emotion instead of strategy. The families are noticing." "What families?" "All of them. The Morettis think you're going soft. The Benedettos are questioning whether we can still be trusted as allies. And the Castellanos obviously see weakness they want to exploit." Thomas stood and walked to the window overlooking the restaurant's main dining room. Below, couples enjoyed romantic dinners. Families celebrated birthdays. Business deals were made over wine and perfectly prepared meals. Normal people living normal lives. For weeks, he'd been imagining a different existence, one where he came home to Mariana's smile instead of reports of violence, where Jake's biggest concern was making the basketball team instead of whether his mother would live to see his graduation. "Set up a meeting with Castellano," Thomas said finally. "You're going to negotiate?" Joey asked incredulously. "I'm going to remind him why nobody moves on Romano territory." Thomas's voice carried the steel that had made him legendary. "But I'm going to do it smart, not sloppy." Vincent nodded approvingly. "Now you sound like the Thomas Romano we know." After the meeting ended, Thomas remained alone in the dining room, staring at his reflection in the dark window. Two lives warred within him, the man he'd been and the man Mariana made him want to become. His phone rang. Mariana's name appeared on the screen. "Hi." Her voice was warm, slightly breathless. "Sorry to bother you at work, but Jake made the JV basketball team. He wanted to call you himself, but I talked him out of interrupting your meeting." Thomas felt the day's tension drain away. "That's fantastic news. Tell him I'm proud of him." "Why don't you tell him yourself? We're making celebration dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs, but I'll be there in an hour," Thomas said, already reaching for his coat. "Thomas, is everything okay? You sound tense." He paused, wondering how she'd managed to read his mood through a phone call. "Just business complications, nothing I can't handle." "Well, Jake's got a new joke about basketball coaches that might cheer you up. Fair warning, it's terrible." Thomas found himself smiling. "I'll brace myself." As he drove toward the North Side apartment, Thomas tried to ignore the voice in his head, warning him that his two worlds were on a collision course. Tonight he just wanted to celebrate Jake's success and see Mariana's eyes light up when she talked about her son's achievements. Tomorrow, he'd deal with the consequences of being Thomas Romano in love. To Sixi, the celebration dinner had been perfect. Jake's terrible joke about coaches had actually made Thomas laugh out loud, and Mariana's homemade meatballs were better than anything served in his restaurants. For 3 hours, Thomas had felt like a normal man with a normal family. Now, standing in his penthouse at 2 a.m., he stared at the photos Vincent had delivered an hour ago. Pictures of Mariana leaving her doctor's appointment, pictures of Jake at basketball practice, pictures of Thomas himself entering their apartment building. Someone was watching them. "How long have they been under surveillance?" Thomas asked into his secure phone. Vincent's voice was grim. "At least a week, maybe longer. Professional job, we only caught them because Sal spotted the same car 3 days in a row." "Who ordered it?" "We're still working on that, but boss, there's something else." The photos came with a message. Thomas's blood ran cold. "What kind of message?" "Beautiful family you have there." "Romano. Shame if something happened to them." No signature, but the paper had a Castellano family watermark. Thomas sat heavily in his leather chair, processing the implications. By caring for Mariana and Jake, he'd painted targets on their backs. In his world, leverage meant everything, and enemies would use any weakness they could find. "Double the security around their building," Thomas ordered. "Invisible security, they can't know they're being watched." "Already done. But Thomas, you need to consider the possibility that your best move is to distance yourself from them, for their safety." The suggestion hit Thomas like a physical blow. Walk away from the only happiness he'd known in 20 years to keep Mariana and Jake safe. It was the logical choice, the strategic choice. It was also impossible. "Set up a meeting with Castellano for tomorrow night. Just him and me." "That's dangerous, boss. If this is about starting a war, this isn't about war. Vincent, this is about making sure certain boundaries are understood and respected." Thomas ended the call and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittered like scattered diamonds. He'd conquered this city through careful planning, strategic alliances, and, when necessary, swift violence. But none of that mattered if he couldn't protect the woman and boy who'd become his whole world. His personal phone buzzed with a text message from Mariana. Jake fell asleep reading about basketball strategy. "He's so happy about making the team. Thank you for everything you've done for us. For the first time in years, I'm excited about the future." Thomas stared at the message, memorizing every word. Tomorrow night, he'd meet with Marco Castellano and make it clear that any threat to Mariana and Jake would be met with overwhelming force. The old Thomas Romano, the one without weaknesses to exploit, was about to remind Chicago exactly why he'd become the most feared man in the city. But first he had one more call to make. Dr. Morrison answered on the second ring. "Mr. Romano, is everything all right? I need to discuss Mariana Wilson's treatment options. Specifically, I want to know about accelerated therapy protocols." "Accelerated?" "Mr. Romano, she's responding beautifully to the current treatment plan. Why would we want to rush? Because I may need to send her and her son away from Chicago for a while, for their safety." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Dr. Morrison was smart enough to read between the lines. "How long would they be away?" she asked finally. "I don't know, maybe a few months, maybe longer." "Mr. Romano, interrupting her treatment now could be dangerous. She's at a critical stage where consistency is vital." Thomas closed his eyes. Every choice led to danger. Staying put made them targets. Leaving could kill Mariana as surely as any bullet. What if I arranged for treatment wherever they went? The best doctors, whatever it costs? "It's possible, but Mr. Romano, may I speak frankly?" "Go ahead." "That woman is in love with you. I see it every time she talks about you. Sending her away might save her life, but it will break her heart. As her doctor, I have to consider all aspects of her health." Love. Thomas had suspected it, hoped for it, but hearing it confirmed made everything more complicated and more precious. "Thank you for your honesty, doctor. Let me think about this." Thomas walked to his window again, watching the city he'd claimed as his own. Somewhere out there, Marco Castellano was planning his next move, and Thomas had less than 18 hours to ensure that move wouldn't destroy the only two people who mattered to him anymore. The warehouse in Chinatown had been neutral territory for decades, a place where Chicago's family heads could meet without fear of ambush. Thomas arrived at exactly 9 p.m., accompanied only by Vincent and 2 bodyguards. Marco Castellano was already waiting with a similar entourage. "Tommy Romano," Castellano smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "You look good. Love agrees with you." Thomas didn't react to the provocation. At 55, Marco Castellano was old school, a man who believed in respect through fear and saw Thomas's newer methods as weakness. "You wanted to talk, Marco, talk. Straight to business, I like that." Castellano lit a cigar, taking his time. "Word is you've developed an attachment to some civilians, a sick woman and her bastard son." Vincent shifted beside Thomas, recognizing the insult for what it was, a direct challenge. In their world, family was sacred, whether blood family or chosen family. "Choose your next words very carefully, Marco." "Or what? You'll send your lawyers after me?" Castellano laughed harshly. "The Thomas Romano I used to fear would have put a bullet in my head for what I just said, but that man's gone soft, playing house with a woman who don't even know what he really is." Thomas remained perfectly still, but Vincent recognized the predatory calm that preceded Thomas's most violent moments. "You've been watching them," Thomas said quietly. "Beautiful woman. Shame about the illness, but modern medicine works miracles. Doesn't it? Especially when you've got unlimited resources for treatment." Castellano's smile turned cruel. "Be a real tragedy if something happened to interrupt that treatment." "You're making a mistake, Marco." "Am I? Because from where I sit, you've given me the perfect leverage. Thomas Romano's got a weakness now, and weaknesses in this business get people killed." Thomas stepped closer, close enough that Castellano's bodyguards tensed, but Thomas ignored them completely, focusing his attention on the man who'd just signed his own death warrant. "Let me explain something to you, Marco. For 20 years I've been careful about collateral damage. Surgical, precise, professional. But if you or anyone in your organization so much as breathes near Mariana Wilson or her son, I will burn your entire family to the ground. Not just the business, everyone. Your sons, your nephews, everyone who shares your name will disappear." Castellano's smirk faltered. This wasn't the voice of a man gone soft. This was the voice of a predator who'd found something worth killing for. "You're threatening war over some woman? I'm promising annihilation over the people I protect." Thomas's voice never rose above a conversational tone. "The choice is yours, Marco. Back off or find out exactly how ruthless Thomas Romano can be when he's motivated." Before Castellano could respond, Vincent's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. He checked it quickly, his face paling. "Boss, we need to go. Now." Thomas saw the fear in his lieutenant's eyes. "What is it?" "The apartment building. There's been an incident." Thomas felt his world tilt. Without another word to Castellano, he was moving toward the exit, Vincent and his men scrambling to keep up. "This conversation isn't over, Romano," Castellano called after him. Thomas paused in the doorway. "Yes, it is." The drive to Mariana's building took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Thomas's mind raced through worst-case scenarios, while Vincent coordinated with their security team via radio. "Talk to me, Vincent." Fire alarm went off at 8:30. When emergency crews arrived, they found signs of forced entry into the Wilson apartment. No bodies, but there are signs of a struggle. Thomas's vision went red around the edges. If Castellano had moved while he was at the meeting, any witnesses? Mrs. Chen from 4B saw two men in the hallway around 8:15. She thought they were delivery guys. Security footage? Cameras were disabled. Professional job. Thomas's phone rang. Unknown number. "Romano." A voice he didn't recognize spoke carefully. "Your friends are safe, for now. Navy Pier, North End, 1 hour. Come alone or the woman dies." The line went dead. Thomas stared at the phone, years of careful control threatening to snap. Someone had taken Mariana and Jake, and every instinct he possessed screamed for immediate, overwhelming violence. But they were alive. For now, that had to be enough. "Navy Pier," he told Vincent, "and get every available man to surround that area. If I don't come out, burn it all down." Navy Pier stretched into Lake Michigan like a finger pointing toward darkness. At 10:30 p.m., most tourists had gone home, leaving the pier largely empty except for security patrols and maintenance crews. Thomas walked alone toward the north end, his hands visible and empty. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every sound might be his last warning. But his focus remained absolute. Find Mariana and Jake. Eliminate the threat. Get them to safety. The north end of the pier housed an old warehouse supposedly abandoned, but clearly in use tonight. Light leaked from between boards covering the windows. Thomas approached the single door, noting the expensive cars parked in the shadows nearby. "Mr. Romano." A tall man in an expensive suit emerged from the warehouse. "Thank you for coming. Who are you?" "My name is David Chen. I represent certain business interests that conflict with your recent personal developments." Thomas studied the man. Mid-40s, Asian American, manicured hands that had never seen violence. Corporate, not street. Which meant this wasn't about territory or respect. This was about money. "What do you want? Walk with me." Chen led him into the warehouse, where Thomas saw a setup that made his blood boil. Mariana sat tied to a chair in the center of the space, conscious but clearly drugged. Jake was beside her, bound but alert, his teenage eyes blazing with fury. 6 armed men surrounded them, professionals by their stance and equipment. This wasn't Castellano's operation. This was something bigger. "Beautiful family," Chen observed casually. "The boy has spirit. Reminds me of another young man who used to steal to survive. If you hurt them..." "Mr. Romano, please. I'm a civilized man conducting a business negotiation. Your friends are collateral, nothing more." "What business?" Chen gestured toward a table covered with photographs and documents. "Your recent activities have become problematic for my employers. Legitimate businesses don't appreciate when organized crime figures develop public profiles." Thomas moved closer to examine the materials. Photos of him entering Northwestern Memorial with Mariana. Financial records showing his payments for her treatment. Medical files that should have been confidential. Mariana Wilson's miraculous recovery has generated significant media attention, Chen continued. Human interest stories about mysterious benefactors helping sick mothers. Very heartwarming. Also very bad for business when that benefactor is Thomas Romano. So this is about publicity? This is about exposure. My employers have invested heavily in maintaining the fiction that organized crime is a thing of the past in Chicago. Your humanitarian efforts threaten that narrative. Thomas felt a cold understanding. You want me to stop helping her? I want you to disappear from her life completely. No more medical bills, no more apartment, no more playing father figure to the boy. A clean break that allows the story to fade away. And if I refuse? Chen's smile was practiced, corporate. Then accidents happen. Accidents. Car crashes, medical complications, random street violence. Chicago can be very dangerous for people without proper protection. Jake spoke for the first time, his voice shaking with rage. You bastards! Thomas saved my mum's life. Jake, don't! Mariana tried to speak, but the drugs made her words slurred. Chen nodded toward one of his men, who struck Jake across the face. The boy's head snapped back, blood flowing from his nose. Something snapped inside Thomas. The careful control he'd maintained throughout the evening evaporated, replaced by the cold fury that had made him legend in Chicago's underworld. "You just made your final mistake," Thomas said quietly. Chen laughed. "Mr. Romano, you're outnumbered and outgunned. Your only smart play is to walk away." Thomas smiled, and Chen's laughter died. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You made one crucial error in your research," Thomas said, pulling out his phone. "You assumed I came here alone." The warehouse windows exploded inward as Vincent's assault team breached from 6 different directions. Professional kidnappers or not, Chen's men were caught completely off guard by the coordinated attack. The firefight lasted exactly 47 seconds. The safe house overlooked Lake Michigan from a bluff in Winnetka, 30 miles north of Chicago. Dawn was breaking over the water as Thomas sat beside Mariana's bed, watching her sleep off the sedatives Chen's people had given her. Jake was in the next room, finally resting after the paramedics had treated his injuries. The boy was resilient. He'd insisted on staying awake until he was sure his mother was okay. "How long have you been sitting there?" Mariana's voice was soft but clear. The drugs were wearing off. "A few hours. How do you feel?" "Like I've been hit by a truck." She struggled to sit up, and Thomas helped arrange pillows behind her. "Is Jake?" "He's fine. Bruised and angry, but fine. He's been asking about you every 10 minutes since we got here." Mariana studied Thomas's face in the morning light. She saw exhaustion, relief, and something that looked like barely contained rage. "What happened to those men?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "They won't be bothering anyone again." "You killed them." It wasn't a question. Mariana had connected enough pieces about Thomas's life to understand that violence was sometimes part of his world. But this was the first time she'd seen its direct aftermath. "Yes, because they threatened us, because they hurt Jake, because they put their hands on you." Thomas met her eyes steadily. "Because they made the mistake of thinking I'd let anyone harm the people I love." The word hung between them, love. They danced around it for weeks, but crisis had stripped away pretense. "Thomas, I know what you're going to say, that my world is too dangerous for you and Jake, that you can't be with someone who solves problems with violence, and you're right." Mariana reached for his hand. "Actually, I was going to say that I love you too." Thomas stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "What?" "I love you, not despite who you are, but because of who you are. You're a man who uses terrible power to protect people who can't protect themselves. You saved my life, gave my son hope for the future, and last night, you risked everything to get us back safely." "Mariana, you don't understand what being with me means. I understand that it means never having to watch my son go hungry. I understand that it means having the best medical care in the world. I understand that it means being loved completely by a man who would burn down cities to keep us safe." Thomas felt something shift inside his chest. For 30 years he'd believed that love was weakness, that caring made a man vulnerable. But looking at Mariana's determined face, he realized the opposite was true. Love hadn't made him weak. It had made him absolutely ruthless in defense of what mattered. "The danger won't stop," he said quietly. "There will always be people who want to use you against me. Then we'll face them together. All 3 of us." "Together?" Mariana smiled, the expression transforming her face despite her exhaustion. "Thomas Romano, are you going to ask me to marry you, or do I have to do everything myself?" For the first time in his adult life, Thomas Romano, feared head of the most powerful crime family in Chicago, was completely speechless. From the next room came Jake's voice. "It's about time. I was starting to think you were never going to ask her." Thomas and Mariana looked toward the doorway where Jake stood grinning, despite his bandaged nose and bruised face. "Were you eavesdropping on us?" Mariana asked sternly. "Mom, he's been in love with you since the first day he saw you in that horrible house, and you've been in love with him since he paid for your treatment. It was painful watching you 2 dance around it." Thomas found himself laughing, actually laughing, while sitting beside a hospital bed in a safe house after one of the most violent nights of his life. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe it was about time. 6 months later, the Romano estate in Lake Forest had been transformed. What was once a fortress designed for privacy and security now hosted Jake's basketball team for a celebration dinner. The JV squad had won their conference championship, and Jake had been named team MVP. Thomas stood on the terrace watching Mariana laugh with the other parents, her hair catching afternoon sunlight. The experimental treatment had been completely successful. Dr. Morrison now called her recovery miraculous. She'd gained 30 pounds, her colour had returned completely, and she moved with the energy of a woman 10 years younger. "Boss, we've got that situation handled," Vincent said, joining him on the terrace. "Which situation?" "The Benedetto family was asking questions about your new domestic arrangements. Mickey had a conversation with Tony Benedetto about the importance of respecting boundaries." Thomas nodded absently. Since the night at Navy Pier, he'd made it clear throughout Chicago's underworld that his family was off limits. Most had gotten the message quickly. Those who hadn't had received more direct education. Any blowback? None. Turns out most people respect a man who protects his own. Good. Thomas watched Jake demonstrate his championship-winning shot to a group of younger teammates. "Any word from the federal investigation?" "Dead end. The Chen group covered their tracks well before they made their move on you. Far as the FBI knows, they were foreign investors who left the country unexpectedly." Thomas's expression darkened. David Chen's employers had never been identified, despite Vincent's best efforts. Somewhere out there, powerful people still considered Thomas Romano's happiness a threat to their interests. But they'd learned from Chen's mistakes. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. "Keep digging. People that organize don't just disappear." "Will do. Oh, and boss." "Oh." The wedding planner called. "She wants to discuss security arrangements for the ceremony." Thomas smiled. After months of planning, he and Mariana would be married next weekend in the estate's gardens. A small ceremony, just family and a few close friends. Jake would serve as best man, a fact that still made the teenager grin like an idiot. "Tell her to coordinate with our security team. Nothing obvious, but nothing left to chance." "Already handled." Vincent paused. "You know, in 15 years working for you, I've never seen you this happy." Thomas considered the observation. Vincent was right. For the first time in his adult life, Thomas woke up each morning looking forward to the day ahead instead of simply surviving it. "Having something worth protecting changes everything," Thomas said. "Yeah, it does. But boss, you know this won't always be easy, right? The business still requires certain decisions that Mariana might not understand." Before Thomas could respond, Jake appeared beside them, basketball still tucked under his arm. "Thomas, Mom wants to know if you're ready for the team photo. Coach wants you in it since you sponsored the championship celebration." "I'll be right there." Thomas turned to Vincent. "We'll deal with problems as they come. Right now, I'm going to take pictures with my family." As they walked toward the group gathered for photos, Jake spoke quietly. "You know, my dad left when I was 6. Said he couldn't handle having a sick wife and a kid to worry about." Thomas glanced at the teenager who'd become like a son to him. "That was his loss. Saeed." "Yeah, it was. But his leaving made room for someone better." Jake grinned up at him. "Someone who doesn't run when things get complicated." "Jake Romano Wilson, get over here," Mariana called out, using the hyphenated name Jake had chosen for after the wedding. Jake ran toward his mother, leaving Thomas momentarily stunned by the casual use of Romano Wilson. They discussed Jake wanting to take Thomas's name, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that planning hadn't. Thomas Romano, feared crime boss, millionaire businessman, man who'd built an empire through ruthless calculation, was about to become a husband and father. The irony wasn't lost on him. But as Mariana caught his eye and smiled, Thomas realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing a man could do was allow himself to be completely, vulnerably happy. And sometimes it was worth every risk. The wedding day dawned perfect. Clear skies, gentle breeze off the lake, and temperatures in the mid-70s. Thomas stood at his bedroom window watching the catering staff set up tables in the garden below, feeling an unfamiliar nervousness. In 2 hours, he'd marry the woman who'd changed everything about his life. In 2 hours, Jake would officially become his son. In 2 hours, Thomas Romano would have a family worth more than all the money and power he'd accumulated. "Second thoughts?" Vincent asked from the doorway. "None." "You?" Vincent laughed. "Boss, I've watched you face down federal prosecutors, rival family heads, and armed raids without blinking. But you're nervous about marrying a woman who's clearly crazy about you. It's not the marrying her part that's making me nervous." "Then what?" Thomas gestured toward the window. 50 guests were arriving. Mariana's friends from the hospital, Jake's teammates and coaches, a few of Thomas's legitimate business associates, and select members of his organization who'd become genuinely fond of his unconventional family. All those people are here because they believe I'm capable of making her happy. What if they're wrong? Thomas, you saved her life, gave her son a future, and spent 6 months proving every day that you do anything to protect them. If you're not capable of making her happy, nobody is. A knock interrupted them. Jake appeared in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, his hair actually combed for once. "Mum wants to know if you're ready for the first look photos," Jake said, then grinned. "Fair warning, she looks incredible. Like, really incredible. I'm pretty sure you're going to forget how to talk." Thomas straightened his tie one final time. "How do I look, kid?" Jake studied him seriously. "Like a man who's about to marry his best friend. It's a good look on you." 20 minutes later, Thomas stood in the library waiting for Mariana, photographer positioned discreetly nearby, to capture their first moment, seeing each other on their wedding day. "Okay, she's coming down the hall," the photographer whispered. "Remember, just react naturally." The library door opened and Thomas turned around. Jake had been right. Thomas forgot how to talk, how to breathe, how to think about anything except the vision in white walking toward him. Mariana wore a simple but elegant dress that highlighted her renewed health and natural grace. Her hair was swept up, revealing the diamond earrings he'd given her the night he proposed, but it was her smile, radiant with joy and love, that stopped his heart completely. "Hi," she said softly, reaching for his hands. "Hi yourself." Thomas's voice was rougher than usual. "You're beautiful. You're not bad yourself." "Mr. Romano." They stood there holding hands, photographer capturing the moment while they simply looked at each other and marveled at how far they'd traveled from that day in a decaying house when desperation had brought them together. "Are you ready for this?" Mariana asked. Thomas thought about the question seriously. Ready to be married to the most incredible woman he'd ever met. Ready to be the kind of father Jake deserved. Ready to risk everything he'd built for the chance at genuine happiness. "I've been ready since the moment you asked me why I helped you," he said. And because everyone deserves a fighting chance. Including us." Mariana stood on her toes and kissed him gently. "I love you, Thomas Romano." "I love you too, soon to be Mrs. Romano. Actually, it's going to be Mrs. Romano Wilson. Jake and I decided we wanted to honor both our past and our future." Thomas felt his chest tighten with emotion. After 30 years of building walls around his heart, this woman and her son had torn them all down and given him something he'd never imagined possible, a real family. "Mrs. Romano Wilson it is," he said, kissing her hand. "Now let's go get married before I change my mind about sharing you with 50 other people." "Too late," Mariana grinned. "I've got witnesses, a signed contract, and a teenager who's been planning this wedding longer than we have." As they walked toward the garden together, Thomas realized that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged. 1 year later, Thomas Romano stood in his home office reviewing quarterly reports from his legitimate businesses. The numbers were exceptional. His restaurants were booming, construction projects were ahead of schedule, and the waste management contracts were proving incredibly profitable. But the real change wasn't in the numbers. It was in the sounds coming from the rest of the house. "Thomas," Mariana called from the kitchen, "Jake's guidance counselor is on the phone about his college applications." "Coming." Thomas saved his documents and headed downstairs, marveling at how domestic his life had become. Jake was in his senior year now, captain of the varsity basketball team and maintaining a 3.8 GPA. College scouts had been calling regularly. Northwestern, DePaul, even some programs in California were interested. The kid who'd once stolen wallets to buy medicine for his dying mother now had his pick of full scholarships. "Mr. Romano," the guidance counselor's voice was warm through the speakerphone. "I wanted to discuss Jake's college options. His grades and athletic performance have been exceptional." Thomas listened as the counselor outlined opportunities at universities across the country. Each option represented Jake's bright future, but also meant losing the boy who'd become his son in everything but blood. After the call ended, Jake looked at Thomas seriously. "You know I don't have to go far away for college, right? There are great schools here in Chicago. Kid, you go wherever gives you the best opportunity. Don't limit yourself because of us." "Because of you. Thomas, you and Mom are the reason I have these opportunities in the first place." Before Thomas could respond, Mariana appeared with an envelope in her hands, her face glowing with excitement. "What's that?" Thomas asked. "Test results from Dr. Morrison." Mariana's voice was breathless with joy. "Thomas, I'm officially in complete remission, 5 years cancer-free as of today." Thomas felt the last weight he'd been carrying lift from his shoulders. For months after their wedding, he'd woken some nights in cold sweats, terrified that Mariana's illness would return. Dr. Morrison had assured them the experimental treatment had been completely successful, but until this moment, fear had lingered. "That calls for a celebration," Thomas said, pulling his wife into his arms. "Actually, there's more." Mariana's smile was mysterious. "Dr. Morrison cleared me for all normal activities, including some we've been discussing." It took Thomas a moment to understand, then his eyes widened. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that if we want to give Jake a little brother or sister, there's no medical reason we can't." Jake made a face. "Gross, but also kind of cool. I always wanted a sibling." Thomas stared at his wife, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was offering. At 43, he'd never imagined becoming a father to a baby. But the thought of a child who carried Mariana's eyes and his stubborn determination filled him with unexpected longing. "What do you think?" Mariana asked softly. Before Thomas could answer, Vincent appeared in the kitchen doorway looking apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but we've got a situation that needs your attention." Thomas sighed. Even in his new domestic happiness, business occasionally intruded. "What kind of situation?" "The good kind. Senator Richards wants to meet about that community development project you proposed. Apparently, your reputation for philanthropy has reached some very important ears." Thomas blinked in surprise. For months, he'd been quietly using his resources to fund community centers, scholarship programs, and small business loans in Chicago's struggling neighborhoods. What had started as a way to honor Mariana's belief in second chances had evolved into a genuine passion for giving back. "The senator wants to discuss federal funding to expand your program statewide," Vincent continued. "This could be huge, boss. Legitimate huge." Thomas looked around his kitchen, at Jake studying college brochures, at Mariana still glowing with health and happiness, at the life they'd built together through love and determination. A year ago, he'd been a feared crime boss, whose only legacy would be violence and intimidation. Now he was a husband, a father, and apparently a philanthropist whose work might help thousands of families like the Wilsons. "Set up the meeting," Thomas told Vincent. "And Vincent, start looking into legitimate ways to expand our community programs." I think it's time Thomas Romano became known for building things up instead of tearing them down. After Vincent left, Thomas turned back to his family. "Now, where were we?" "You were about to tell me whether you want to have a baby," Mariana said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Thomas pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly, while Jake groaned about public displays of affection. "Mrs. Romano Wilson," Thomas said against her lips, "I want everything with you. Babies, college graduations, grandchildren, growing old together. All of it. Even when I'm cranky during pregnancy? Especially then." Jake looked up from his brochures. "Okay, that's actually really sweet. But can we maybe discuss this somewhere that isn't the kitchen? Some conversations shouldn't happen near food." Thomas laughed, realizing that this domestic arguments about appropriate conversation locations was exactly the life he'd never dared to dream of. 6 months later, as Thomas held his newborn daughter while Jake practiced his high school graduation speech, and Mariana planned the expansion of their community foundation, he reflected on the night that had changed everything. One desperate boy stealing a wallet had led to the greatest love story of his life. Sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the darkest moments, and sometimes the most dangerous thing a man could do was allow himself to believe in happy endings. Thomas Romano, former crime boss, devoted husband, proud father, had learned that some risks were worth everything.